Hey everyone. We are so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers. Please smash that subscribe button and help our unveiled family reach our goal. Thanks to everyone who has already subscribed. We love you. Now to the video.
He had that kind of profile that looked artistic but not forced. Every photo had a mood to it: abandoned streets, neon lights, weird old places. His bio said he was into urban photography and hidden spots people forget exist. He wasn't like the usual guys who posted gym photos or mirror selfies. He seemed more grounded, like the kind of person who found meaning in things that most people ignored. We talked for 3 days before he suggested we meet. He said he'd found a cool old motel on the edge of town, the type that still had glowing signs and peeling paint. He said the place looked cinematic and thought it'd be fun to grab coffee and take a few photos there before it got torn down. I didn't think it sounded that bad. I'd seen people do photo shoots at gas stations and diners before. Plus, he didn't come off creepy. He wrote full sentences, had jokes, even seemed shy sometimes. When I told my friend, she said it sounded weird, but I brushed it off. He said it'd be around sunset, which made sense for lighting if he was really into photography. The place was a 40-minute drive from my side of town. As I got closer, everything looked more rundown. The roads were cracked, the signs faded. I remember thinking how dead it felt. There were barely any cars, just empty fields and a few stray buildings. Then I saw it. The motel. It looked straight out of an old movie: flickering red sign, chipped blue paint, half the letters missing. There were weeds growing through the pavement and windows covered with old curtains. He was already there, leaning against a car parked under a broken light. He waved when he saw me and smiled like everything was normal. I parked a few spaces away, grabbed my bag, and walked over. The first thing that threw me off was the tape. Yellow tape, half torn, flapping in the wind near one corner of the parking lot. It looked old, like it had been there for a while. I pointed it out, and he said the place had been used for a police shoot or something a while back. He sounded too casual about it. We walked closer to the building, and the air felt heavier. It wasn't just old, it was silent. The kind of silence that feels wrong. No cars, no sound from the highway, just wind brushing against the plastic signs. He told me to follow him around the back because the light hit better there. I hesitated but didn't want to be rude. I followed, keeping a bit of distance. He was carrying a small camera and a tripod bag, talking about how he loved abandoned spaces because they had character. But as we walked around the side, I noticed something near one of the doors. A dark stain on the concrete. Not big, but out of place. It looked old, like it had been scrubbed but never fully gone. I looked at it, then at him, but he was too busy setting up his tripod to notice. He asked me to stand by the railing while he adjusted the frame. I did, but my stomach felt tight. There was still some yellow tape wrapped around one of the railings behind me. The words on it were faded, but I could still make out crime scene. That's when I saw the reflection in his camera lens. It was shaking. His hands weren't steady. He wasn't even aiming at me, he was filming toward the same door where the stain was. Before I could ask anything, I heard the sound of engines. Multiple. Tires crunching gravel. I turned toward the road and saw 2 police SUVs pulling up fast. The lights flashed across the motel sign, lighting everything up red and blue. He froze. Completely. One of the officers shouted something, and he raised his hand slightly but didn't move from his spot. Another officer came out of the car holding a flashlight, shouting his name. That's when I realized they already knew who he was. I didn't even have time to process it before they surrounded him. They cuffed him right there, beside the camera bag. One of the officers asked me to step back and if I was okay. I just nodded, still trying to figure out what was happening. They questioned me for a few minutes. One of them explained that the motel was still an active crime scene. A woman had been found dead there just a week before, in one of the rooms near the back. They'd been investigating connections to someone she met through Tinder. When they described the suspect, it matched him exactly. The same car, the same camera, the same style of photos on his dating profile. They said he'd gone off the radar after the murder and had been deleting accounts ever since. The only reason they found him tonight was because he'd logged back into the same profile again, using it to contact me. Apparently, his pattern was always the same. He'd invite women to weird, isolated places for photos. He'd talk about lighting, locations, or urban art to make it sound normal. They'd been tracking his account for days, waiting for him to set up another meeting. My message agreeing to meet had been what helped them locate him. The motel had been under quiet watch the entire time. They just didn't expect me to show up right before the arrest. When I looked back, I saw one of the officers pulling open the car door to search it. Inside were stacks of printed photos, old motels, women posing in front of them, some with dates written on the back. Another officer picked up his phone from the ground. The wallpaper was a photo of the motel itself. They said he'd been revisiting the scene every few nights. Not to take photos for art, but to relive it. I sat in my car for nearly an hour after they took him away. The lights from the police cars bounced off the motel walls, making the whole place look like it was glowing. Every detail replayed in my head, the way he smiled when I arrived, how calm he was, how familiar he seemed with the building. He hadn't been exploring it for the first time. He knew exactly where everything was. I didn't go home right away. I drove to a 24-hour diner and sat there until sunrise, drinking coffee I barely touched. When I checked my Tinder the next day, his profile was gone. But the last message from him was still there: "Can't wait to show you something cool tonight." Now whenever I see abandoned buildings or neon motel signs, I look away. I think about that parking lot, the yellow tape fluttering behind me, and the sound of police shouting his name. It wasn't a photo spot. It was a graveyard for the kind of people who trusted too easily.
It started with her saying she had connections. Not in a braggy way, just casual, like it was no big deal that her friend managed one of the nicest rooftop bars in the city and sometimes let her use it after closing. I didn't think much of it. People flex random things on dating apps all the time. She was confident, outgoing, kind of wild in the fun way. Her profile said she was into spontaneous nights and pretty lights, and the rooftop thing fit perfectly. We talked all week and she kept hinting at this bar like it was some secret spot only a few people knew about. When she finally invited me, she said it'd be our own little view of the city, and that we could bring drinks since the place would be empty. I figured it was one of those quiet perks that came from knowing people in hospitality. I didn't think twice. The night we met, she looked exactly like her pictures, maybe even better. Red jacket, high ponytail, glowing skin. She had that confident walk, like she knew exactly where she was going. She said we'd meet near the alley entrance because the elevators closed early. That was my first small red flag. We got there around 11 p.m. The streets were half empty, just taxis passing by and the sound of wind between the buildings. She led me to a narrow door next to a loading dock. It looked like something employees would use. She pulled out her phone, opened some app, and tapped something. A few seconds later, the door clicked open. I laughed and asked if she really had a key. She said her friend gave her access through the maintenance system. I didn't know enough about security doors to question it, so I followed. Inside, it was dark and echoey. We climbed 2 flights of stairs and she seemed completely sure of every turn. She said she'd been there a few times before. I noticed how she moved fast, like she didn't want to be seen or heard. When we reached the rooftop door, she used a small card to unlock it. She said it was a pass from her friend who worked in management. The rooftop was exactly how she described it. String lights, empty lounge chairs, tall glass panels around the edges. The view of the city was insane. You could see the skyline glowing in every direction. It felt unreal standing there with no one else around. She walked straight to the bar area, pulled a bottle of wine from her bag and poured us both glasses. Music started playing from a portable speaker she'd brought. She turned it low so it wouldn't echo too much. For the first 20 minutes, it actually felt like the best date ever. The view, the quiet, the soft music, it all seemed perfect. She kept taking photos and videos, saying she loved how the city looked from up here. I thought she was just posting to her story or whatever. Then I started noticing little details that didn't add up. There were no lights on inside the bar, no staff cleaning up, no background noise. Just silence and the faint hum of air vents. I asked if her friend was still working downstairs and she brushed it off, saying the whole team had left early. A bit later she pulled out another phone. Not her main one, this one had cracks all over it. She started typing fast, sending what looked like location pins. A few minutes after that, I heard something, a door slamming from somewhere below us. I asked if someone else was here and she smiled like it was nothing. Then, before I could say anything else, I noticed flashing lights on the building across the street. Red and blue. She froze. Completely. Her eyes darted toward the stairs. Within seconds, bright white beams lit up the rooftop. It was coming from spotlights, security ones. They swept across the floor and hit us dead on. I heard someone shouting from below, but the words blurred together in the noise. She grabbed my wrist, whispering fast that we had to go. I tried to ask what was happening, but she was already heading for the stairwell. As we turned, the rooftop door burst open, and 3 officers came through yelling commands. I raised my hands immediately. She didn't. She tried to run. They caught her halfway across the roof. One officer pinned her arms while another picked up the bag she dropped. They opened it and I could see wires, small cameras, and a ring of keys. I stood frozen, completely clueless about what was going on. One officer came over and asked who I was. I told him we'd just met, that she said her friend managed the bar. He exhaled heavily like he'd heard that line before. Turns out there was no friend. She didn't know anyone who worked there. She'd been breaking into the rooftop for weeks using an old staff key card she'd found from a previous event. Every few nights, she'd sneak in after closing, invite strangers, and host what she called private parties. They said sometimes there'd be a few people, other times up to 20. She'd charge them through her social media, promising a secret location. The company had been trying to catch her for days. The security system kept flagging door breaches around the same time every weekend. They'd finally set up silent alarms and alerted police to wait nearby. That night, she wasn't supposed to be there. The bar had a private event earlier, and staff had just left an hour before we arrived. She must have thought the coast was clear. When they checked the cameras later, she'd been caught multiple times entering through that same maintenance door, sometimes carrying boxes of drinks or DJ equipment. They said she'd been bragging online about owning the best view in the city, under a fake alias. I gave my statement and left around 2 a.m. completely drained. I remember walking through the quiet city streets, still hearing the echoes of police radios in my head. The weirdest part was realizing how casual she'd been, how normal everything seemed until the lights hit. A few days later, her profile vanished. I saw a short article online about an unauthorized rooftop event organizer being arrested for property trespassing and illegal gatherings. No name given, but it was clearly her. Sometimes I think about that night, the sound of our footsteps in the stairwell, the quiet hum of the city below, and how she'd looked completely at ease unlocking a door she was never supposed to have. It didn't feel like danger at first. It felt like adventure. But when those lights hit, it all looked different. The same skyline, the same city, but now it felt cold, exposed, and unreal. Now, whenever someone mentions rooftop dates, I just picture flashing lights, locked doors, and the sound of someone yelling over the wind.
It all started that afternoon when I matched with him. He had one of those casual profiles, outdoor photos, a football jersey, and a line that said he was always up for good conversation. Nothing about him stood out as weird or flashy. He looked normal, like someone you'd actually bump into at a station or a park. We messaged for a few hours straight. It wasn't anything deep, just the kind of back and forth that feels easy. He said he was heading home late from work and asked if I'd ever taken the last train into the city. I said I had once and hated it because it was empty and quiet. He joked that those kinds of trains felt like a movie scene waiting to happen. Later that night, I ended up taking the same line by coincidence. I'd been visiting a friend 2 towns over, and the last train was the only one running back. It was close to midnight when I got on. The carriage was half empty, just a few people scattered around, students, a man sleeping in the corner, and a couple sitting by the doors. I found a seat near the middle, plugged in my earphones, and scrolled through my phone. That's when I got a message from him. He said he was also on the late train heading home. I laughed, thinking it was a weird coincidence, and told him which carriage I was in. A few minutes later, he appeared at the door, smiling like we'd planned it all along. He sat down across from me. In person, he looked the same as his pictures, calm, friendly, but maybe a little too quiet. We started talking about the usual small things, work, travel, how dead the city felt at night. The lights flickered occasionally as the train moved through long tunnels, the kind of dim glow that makes people look half frozen. He kept asking questions, nothing too strange but always slightly personal, where I worked, if I lived alone, what stop I'd be getting off at. I told him I'd probably grab a cab once I got into the city. He nodded, said he might do the same. About halfway through the ride, I noticed something odd. Every time someone walked through the carriage, he'd go quiet and watch them closely until they passed. When the conductor came by to check tickets, he shifted in his seat and pulled his hood up slightly. I brushed it off, assuming he was just tired or maybe didn't want to talk to random people. Then, right before the next stop, two men walked in from the front of the train. They weren't dressed like security or police at first glance, just regular clothes, but both had that serious, scanning look. They moved slowly down the aisle, checking faces as they went. The atmosphere changed instantly. The low hum of the train seemed louder, like everyone had stopped breathing. The man I'd been talking to noticed them too. He tensed up so fast it was like his whole body locked in place. His hand went to his pocket, and his eyes darted toward the emergency exit at the back of the carriage. I whispered asking if he was okay, but he didn't respond. His jaw was tight, and sweat started forming near his temple. The two men reached our end of the carriage. One of them pulled out a badge. They started moving row by row, showing a photo on their phone to passengers, asking quiet questions. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but whatever it was made everyone look nervous. When they got closer, one of them looked straight at the man sitting across from me. He froze. The officer raised his hand, signaling for him not to move. The whole train seemed to stop moving even though it was still gliding on the tracks. One officer told him to stand up slowly. He didn't. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and looked toward the door like he was planning to run for it. The officer stepped forward and repeated himself, louder this time. Everything happened in seconds. The man suddenly stood up, hands half raised, trying to talk his way out of it. The officers grabbed him immediately, pulling his arms behind his back while he kept saying they had the wrong guy. The other passengers stared but didn't move. I sat frozen, completely silent, too scared to even blink. Once he was cuffed, one of the officers turned toward the rest of us and apologized for the disruption. They said they'd been looking for someone matching his description after an incident earlier in the evening. As they walked him toward the exit between carriages, I caught a few words, something about a previous Tinder meetup and assault report. My stomach dropped. They mentioned the cafe name too, one I'd actually been to before. After they left, the passengers started whispering, piecing together what they'd overheard. The conductor came through a few minutes later and said the train would stop at the next station so police could take statements if needed. When we pulled in, I watched through the window as they let him off the train. His head was down, still saying it was a mistake. But one of the detectives pulled out a folder with photos, and it looked like his own face was staring back at him. The officer said he'd been wanted for questioning in connection to an assault on a woman he met through Tinder 2 nights earlier. The location was just 2 stops away from where I'd boarded. CCTV had caught his face leaving the scene, but he'd vanished before they could track him down. They'd been following the train line based on a tip. It was like the air had been sucked out of the station. No one talked. The police thanked everyone for cooperating, then left with him in the back of a patrol car. When I finally got off, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to being alone with him longer. If I hadn't chosen that carriage, if the train hadn't stopped when it did, it could have gone another way entirely. Later that night, I searched the story online. It was already there. Local news headline: Man arrested on train after assault linked to dating app Meet. His name wasn't released, but the description matched him perfectly. They said he'd been using Tinder under multiple names, always meeting late, always suggesting quiet places or late trains so there'd be fewer people around. The woman he'd attacked had managed to escape and report it. The police had been tracking his profile since then. When I read that, everything from that night replayed in my head. The quiet questions, the way he'd studied everyone walking past, the fake calm. He wasn't tired or shy, he was waiting for something to go wrong. Now I can't look at trains the same. Every time I see a reflection in the window or a stranger sitting too close, I think about that ride, the empty seats, the flickering lights, and how he smiled at me like we were just two normal people who'd met by chance. He was just trying to make it look that way until the doors opened.
Started out normal. She looked like one of those people who had her life perfectly balanced. Neat, stylish, a little mysterious but not too much. Her photos showed her at different restaurants, always sitting by a window with soft light behind her. She looked real, not like those over-edited profiles. Her bio said she loved trying hidden food spots and had a weird obsession with good service. I thought that was funny. She messaged first saying she liked my sense of humor. We talked for a few days about food, travel, and the usual small talk. She always mentioned restaurants. She said she knew all the best ones in the city, places no one else had heard of. When I asked her to pick somewhere for our first date, she immediately had one in mind. It was a place called Rocco's Table, tucked behind a row of shops I'd never noticed before. She said it was her go-to because the staff were nice and the food was amazing. I looked it up online, but it barely had any reviews. The website was just a single page with a menu and phone number. It seemed random, but she sounded confident, so I went with it. The night of the date, I got there first. The place was small, dim lights with tables, soft jazz playing in the background. The waiters wore all black and moved quietly, almost too quietly. It didn't look sketchy exactly, just weirdly quiet for a Friday night. She came in right on time, looking even better in person. She smiled, greeted the staff by name, and they seemed to know her. That made me relax a bit. We sat near the back and she ordered wine before I even had a chance to look at the menu. She said she knew what was good there. The conversation started light, where we live, what we do, little things. She was good at talking, like she'd practiced being calm. But every few minutes she'd glance toward the kitchen or the bar. It wasn't obvious, just quick looks. I noticed something else too. Every time the waiter came over, she'd touch her necklace. Not in a nervous way, more like a small gesture. Once, she even adjusted it right as the waiter walked by, and he nodded slightly like he understood. I brushed it off, thinking it was just me overthinking. When the food came, she seemed more relaxed. She talked about her travels, her job in customer data management, whatever that meant. She laughed a lot, told good stories. I actually started to enjoy it. But then, when the waiter brought the bill machine over, things got weird. She reached for it before I could, saying she'd handle it and that we could split later. She looked at the waiter again, then did this tiny motion with her fingers, like she was tapping twice on the edge of the table. It looked like nothing, but the waiter immediately looked nervous. He glanced toward the bar, then back at her. She smiled slightly and handed him her card. He hesitated before taking it. That's when I noticed something under the table. Near her purse, there was a small device with wires leading to a phone. It wasn't plugged in, but it looked like some sort of scanner or card reader. She shifted her bag a little, hiding it with her foot. I didn't know what to do. My heart started racing, but she was acting totally normal. The waiter came back with the machine, and she tapped again on the table before inserting the card. Then she smiled at me and said the wine was her favorite. Seconds later, the front door opened hard enough to make everyone jump. 2 plainclothes officers walked in, badges out. The waiter froze mid-step. My date didn't even turn around at first. She just sighed quietly, like she knew this was coming. They went straight to her. One officer told her to stand, the other moved toward her bag. The waiter stepped back, muttering something under his breath. Everyone in the restaurant stopped moving. She didn't argue. She didn't even ask why. She just stood up slowly, still calm, still collected. The officers pulled the small device out of her bag, held it up, and asked the waiter to confirm something. He nodded right away. I just sat there, stunned, completely lost. They cuffed her and read her rights right there in the middle of the restaurant. She stayed quiet, only glancing at me once. Her face didn't look scared or angry, it looked tired, like she'd done this before. When they took her outside, one officer stayed behind to talk to me. He asked if I knew her real name. I said the one she gave me, and he said that wasn't it. Turns out the restaurant wasn't random. It was part of an ongoing sting operation. The police had been tracking a credit card cloning ring that used restaurants as cover. The group would install hidden card skimmers inside the payment machines and collect people's data. They had employees inside some of the places to help swap terminals or handle fake payments. She was part of it. She wasn't just dating people for fun. She was meeting them at partner restaurants to make transactions that looked normal while helping her crew move clone terminals in and out. Apparently, she'd already been caught on security footage doing it at 3 other spots across the city, each time pretending to pay for a date. They'd been watching her for weeks, waiting to see where she'd show up next. That night, Rocco's table was the trap. The waiter she kept signaling was cooperating with police. The necklace gesture, the tapping, those were codes. She thought she was confirming which device was active. The whole thing went down while I sat there eating pasta, completely clueless. After they left, the restaurant closed early. The waiter apologized, said they'd been told not to scare customers but had to let the operation play out. He said I wasn't in trouble and that they'd been tracking her since morning. I sat in my car afterward for nearly an hour. It didn't even feel real. I kept thinking about how calm she'd been, how everything about her had seemed normal, even kind. She never once acted like someone hiding something that serious. The next day her profile was gone. Deleted. Like she'd never existed. But a local news article popped up 2 days later about a woman arrested in a restaurant credit card cloning sting. They didn't use her name, but I recognized the photo instantly. Same hair, same necklace. It messed with me for weeks after that. The idea that I'd just been sitting across from someone helping run a scam that stole from hundreds of people. The way she smiled while handing over a card machine that wasn't real. The fact that she'd chosen that restaurant specifically for the crime she planned to commit, and made it sound like a date idea. Now whenever someone offers to pick the spot, I hesitate. I keep thinking about how she looked right before they took her, calm, almost professional. Like it wasn't personal. Like it was just another night at work.
I matched with him on a random Wednesday night when I couldn't sleep. He looked calm in his photos, quiet smile, camping gear in the background, one picture by a lake with a sunrise behind him. His bio said he loved disconnecting from the city and finding peace off the grid. He wasn't one of those loud types. He sounded grounded, and I liked that. We started talking the next day. He told me he'd been renting cabins lately just to get away from work stress. Said he liked being somewhere without phone reception, where you could hear your own thoughts. It sounded nice in a weird way. I'd been working nonstop, stuck in the same loop of city noise and screens. When he said he wanted to go on a weekend trip and invited me, I hesitated at first. But he was so relaxed about it, even said he'd already booked the place for himself and I could come if I wanted to. He sent me photos of the cabin, small, wood-paneled, surrounded by trees and hills. It had a fire pit, a little porch, and what looked like a big window overlooking a valley. It didn't look fancy, but it looked peaceful. I agreed to go. We decided I'd drive there separately after work on Friday. He said he'd get there earlier to set things up. The drive was long, 2 hours out of the city, winding roads through farmland and then forest. My signal cut in and out the further I went. By the time I turned off the main road, it was almost dark. The directions he gave me led up a narrow dirt track that climbed through the trees. I remember thinking it was strange how far apart the houses were. I didn't see a single car for miles. When I finally reached the cabin, I could tell right away something felt off. All the curtains were closed, even though it was still early evening, and there were no lights on outside. His car was parked crooked near the porch, like he'd pulled up in a rush. I sat there for a second, engine running, debating whether to call him. Then the porch light flicked on. He opened the door before I even got out. He waved me in, smiling, saying the cabin was perfect, better than the pictures. I tried to shake off the weird tension I felt and followed him inside. It was dim, every window was covered by thick blackout curtains. I thought maybe he was trying to keep the heat in, but it didn't make sense for summer. The air smelled like old wood and something slightly metallic, like dust and iron. He told me to put my stuff down wherever and said he'd already unpacked food and wine. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. His hair was messy, his eyes red around the edges. He laughed when I asked if he was okay, said he'd just had a long drive. I noticed the living room window was nailed shut. Literally nailed. Not screwed, nailed. I asked about it casually, and he said the wind made it rattle, so he fixed it that way. I nodded, trying to believe that. We sat down for wine, and I kept thinking about how silent everything was outside. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just heavy quiet. About 20 minutes in, I heard something outside, a car, distant but coming closer. He froze, just for a second, then got up fast and walked to the window. He didn't open the curtain, just stood there, listening. I asked who it was, but he ignored me. Then I saw flashing lights bounce through the trees. It was police. 2 cars pulling up, tires crunching on the gravel. I turned toward him, and his entire face changed. He muttered something under his breath and started pacing. I stood up, my heart racing. Before I could ask anything, someone pounded on the door. The sound echoed through the cabin like thunder. He didn't move. I could hear voices outside, ordering him to come out. He looked straight at me and said I needed to stay quiet, that it wasn't what it looked like. I backed away toward the kitchen, hands shaking. The police shouted again, louder this time. He finally stepped toward the door, hands half raised, saying he'd open it. But before he touched the handle, it burst open. Officers rushed in, weapons drawn, yelling commands. I screamed, but one of them grabbed me gently, told me to get behind them. The others forced him down to the floor, cuffing him while he kept saying it was a misunderstanding. I stood there, frozen, still trying to figure out what was happening. After a few minutes, one of the officers came over and asked if I was hurt. I said no, just scared. They asked how I knew him. I told them we'd met online, that this was our first trip together. The officer exchanged a look with the others, then sighed. Turns out the car he drove there, the one parked outside, was stolen. Not borrowed, not mistaken, fully stolen. He'd taken it from a rental company 2 days earlier using fake documents. They'd been tracking it ever since. The GPS signal had led them to that exact cabin. But that wasn't the worst part. When they searched the cabin, they found his real ID hidden in a backpack. He wasn't who he said he was. The name he gave me, the job he mentioned, everything, fake. He'd used multiple aliases across different dating apps. They said there were other reports from women who'd met him in remote places and left after bad vibes. Apparently, he'd been hiding out in that cabin since the morning, after being caught on a roadside camera near the stolen car. He must have gotten there hours before me and decided to act like it was all part of the plan. I didn't even want to think about what could have happened if the police hadn't shown up when they did. The blackout curtains, the nailed windows, it wasn't about the wind. It was to keep the place sealed. They took him away that night, and I sat in the back of a police car while they checked the cabin. They found a second phone, a bunch of fake IDs, and cash stuffed in an envelope. I drove home the next morning, still in shock. My hands hurt from gripping the steering wheel so tight. I kept thinking about how normal he'd seemed online, how calm his messages were, how careful he was about not rushing anything. It all felt so calculated now. A week later, I saw his mugshot in an article online. They linked him to several fraud cases, identity theft, and car theft. The headline called him the Tinder traveler. Every detail I'd believed, the photos, the stories, the way he spoke, it was all just a script. The same thing he'd probably said to every other person he lured out to somewhere remote. Now, whenever someone suggests a trip or a weekend away, I can't even pretend to consider it. Every cabin photo looks like a trap. Every quiet plan sounds like an excuse to disappear. That night didn't end how it could have, and I try not to think about the what-ifs. But every time I see trees pressed against a window or blackout curtains drawn too tight, my body remembers being inside that cabin, waiting for the next sound in the dark.
It started with her profile standing out for how real it looked. No filters, no exaggerated poses, just casual photos of her at different street events, smiling behind food stalls, holding what looked like donation buckets. Her bio said she volunteered at community fairs and loved helping small charities that make a big difference. She looked kind, normal, like the sort of person who does late-night fundraisers and bakes cupcakes for causes no one else remembers. She messaged first. Said she liked that my profile wasn't trying too hard. She told me she just finished helping at a charity pop-up and was exhausted but happy. She talked about volunteering like it was part of her personality. She said she helped with donation stalls, sorting cash and handling supplies. I thought that was impressive. Most people barely have time for that kind of thing. After a few days, she asked if I wanted to meet her at a night market happening that weekend. She said she'd be helping out there too, and it'd be fun to walk around after she finished. I'd been to that market before. It's this big mix of food, crafts, and live music that pops up every few months near the waterfront. It's always crowded, but the lights and smell of grilled food make it feel alive. I got there early. The air was cool, people laughing, street performers playing drums. I found her near a stall with charity banners hanging behind it. She waved when she saw me. She was wearing a bright orange vest and holding a small metal till. She looked busy but relaxed, chatting with people dropping coins in the box. When she noticed me, she grinned and said she'd finish up soon so we could grab food. She seemed so comfortable moving between stalls, greeting people like she'd done this 100 times. I stood nearby just watching her for a bit. The market buzzed with lights, kids running past, music echoing off the tents, and the smell of fried noodles drifting through the air. After a while, she told me she just needed to do a quick round to collect from partner stalls. She said the smaller booths kept donation tins that she was supposed to swap out once they filled. It sounded organized, so I followed along, thinking I was seeing her in her element. We went to the first stall, a jewelry booth run by an older woman. My date smiled politely, thanked her, and swapped the small tin from the counter with another one she pulled from her bag. The woman nodded, no questions asked. My date wrote something in a notebook and we moved on. At the second stall, same thing. She'd chat briefly, collect the tin, replace it, then move to the next. It all looked routine. Except, after the fourth stall, I started noticing something odd. The tins she gave back weren't identical to the ones she collected. The logos were slightly off, different fonts, different shades of blue. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it under the neon lights. But then I noticed her slipping one of the original tins into a separate tote bag she kept zipped shut. My stomach turned a little. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she was authorized to do that, maybe the new tins were from a different branch or something. But when we reached the next booth, I saw her glance around before doing it again, faster this time. Her smile tightened whenever someone looked too closely. By the sixth stall, I knew something was off. I wanted to say something, but it was awkward. The crowd, the lights, the noise, it all made it hard to think clearly. Then she turned to me suddenly, said she needed to store the filled ones in the main tent before we could get food. She led me down a row of vendors toward the far end of the market where it was darker, fewer people around. My gut started screaming that something wasn't right. Before I could decide what to do, everything changed in seconds. A man in plain clothes stepped out from between two stalls, flashing a badge. Then another appeared behind us. The crowd seemed to slow, people moving aside as more officers came forward. They called her by name. She froze. I'll never forget how quickly her face changed, like all the warmth drained out of it. She didn't even try to talk her way out of it. She just dropped the tote bag, and when it hit the ground, the sound of metal clinking echoed loud enough for everyone around to hear. The officers cuffed her right there in front of a stall selling churros. People started recording. I just stood there, completely stunned, watching as she kept her head down while they read her rights. One of the undercover officers turned to me, asked if I knew her. I said we'd met online. He looked like he pitied me. They explained quickly what was happening. She'd been under investigation for months. They had CCTV footage of her swapping legitimate charity tins for fake ones at multiple markets and fairs across the city. The fake tins had nearly identical stickers, same logos, but the money never made it to the charities. She'd been caught on camera 3 separate times before tonight, always wearing different vests and using different fake ID badges. They tracked her social media and noticed she kept tagging events she didn't actually volunteer for. So they set up undercover officers at this market, waiting for her to show up again. I stood there while they loaded her into a police car. She didn't look at me once. The rest of the market carried on, though quieter now. The crowd whispered as people packed up early. I walked to my car in silence, still hearing the sound of coins from that bag hitting the ground over and over in my head. When I got home, I checked her Tinder profile. It was already gone. Like she'd never existed. I scrolled through my messages with her, reading them again. Every single thing she'd told me about her volunteering lined up perfectly with her scam. She wasn't helping anyone, she was stealing from every good cause she mentioned. A week later, the story hit local news. Her real name, her arrest, everything. They said she pocketed thousands in donations, using dating apps to find cover stories and blend into events without drawing suspicion. I kept thinking about how she smiled when people handed her coins, how natural she seemed thanking them. Like she'd convinced even herself that what she was doing was normal. Now when I walk through markets, I notice every donation tin, every badge, every vest. I can't tell who's real anymore. She made something so harmless look like a trap.
It started like any normal match. He looked like someone who actually took care of himself, clean haircut, casual pictures, gym selfies but not overdone. His bio was short. He said he worked in finance, liked hiking, coffee, and early mornings. It sounded boring, which honestly made him seem normal. He messaged me first, asking about a cafe I'd tagged in one of my photos. I told him it was my favorite place to go on Sundays, and he said he'd been there once and loved it. We talked about random stuff after that, bad Tinder dates, jobs, family. He seemed grounded, polite, even a bit shy. He suggested we meet at that same cafe the next day. It was one of those small, quiet places on a side street, brick walls, mismatched chairs, the smell of roasted coffee beans everywhere. I liked that it wasn't too public but not sketchy either. I said yes. When I got there, I grabbed a seat by the window and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started thinking he wasn't going to show up. Then he walked in. He looked exactly like his pictures, but something about him felt off. His hair was messy, his hoodie was slightly unzipped, and his hands were shaking. He had a sheen of sweat on his forehead, like he'd just come from a workout or ran there. When I stood to greet him, he smiled quickly and said he came straight from the gym. At first, it made sense. His gym bag was slung over his shoulder, and he looked exhausted. I told him to sit, that it was fine, and he laughed awkwardly. He said traffic was bad and he'd rushed because he didn't want to be late. We ordered coffees, and I noticed he kept glancing out the window every few minutes. He wasn't really focused on the conversation. His leg bounced under the table constantly. Every time someone walked in, he'd glance at the door like he was expecting someone. I asked him if he was okay, and he said he was just tired. He started talking about how stressful his week had been, about work deadlines and barely sleeping. But his eyes didn't match what he was saying. He looked spaced out, lost in his own head. Then, halfway through the drink, he got up suddenly and said he needed to use the bathroom. I watched him walk to the back of the cafe, his hands still trembling slightly. A few minutes passed. Then 5. While I waited, 2 police cars pulled up outside. Blue lights reflected off the cafe window. Everyone inside turned to look. The barista froze mid-pour. The air went silent except for the faint siren in the distance. 2 officers walked in, scanning the place quickly. One of them spoke to the barista while the other checked the corners. I didn't understand what was happening. Then the officer near the counter pointed toward the back of the cafe. Seconds later, they headed straight for the bathroom. I sat there completely still, my hands tightening around my cup. They knocked once, then pushed the door open. I couldn't see from where I was sitting, but I heard movement. Muffled voices. One of the officers said something firm, and then the sound of handcuffs clicking. Everyone in the cafe was staring. The officers brought him out moments later. His head was down, face pale. His hoodie was slightly lifted, showing part of a number plate sticker poking out from his pocket. They led him right past my table, and that's when he looked up for a second. His eyes met mine, just long enough for me to see something that made my stomach drop, guilt. They took him outside, and one of the officers stayed behind to speak to the manager. I could barely process it. I waited until they left, then asked the barista what had happened. She said the police told her they'd been tracking a hit-and-run suspect whose car had been found abandoned a few blocks away. Security footage showed a man running from the scene, carrying a black gym bag. Someone nearby had spotted him heading toward this cafe. I sat there speechless. The details lined up perfectly, the bag, the sweat, the shaky hands. Later, I saw the story on a local news page. The crash had happened about 20 minutes before he met me. He'd hit a cyclist at an intersection and kept driving. Witnesses tried to chase his car, but he ditched it and taken off on foot. They tracked him through street cameras until he walked into the cafe like nothing happened. That's why he kept checking the window. Why he was nervous. Why he kept saying he just came from the gym. He wasn't lying about being out of breath. He'd literally run from the scene of a crime straight into a first date. The weirdest part was how well he'd been pretending. If the police hadn't shown up when they did, I might have spent the whole evening with him, none the wiser. He might have told me stories, joked, maybe walked me to my car, all while knowing what he'd just done. I read that the cyclist survived but was badly injured. The guy was charged with reckless driving, leaving the scene, and obstruction. The report said he'd been in a panic and thought he could get away long enough to figure things out. I guess meeting someone for coffee was part of his plan to look normal. When I think about it now, what creeps me out most isn't the crime itself, it's how casual he was about it. How he could sit across from me, hands shaking, pretending he'd just had a hard workout, when in reality he'd been running from sirens. I deleted our chat right after that night. I couldn't even look at his profile again. His account disappeared by the next morning anyway. Now, whenever someone says they're just coming from the gym, I think about that cafe, the flashing lights outside, and the way his eyes darted around like he was stuck in two worlds at once, the one he'd already ruined and the one he was still trying to fake.
It started with her photos looking too good to be real, skyline views, a modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and her sitting on a gray couch holding a glass of wine like she owned the place. Her bio was short but confident. She said she worked in interior design and loved city nights, good lighting, and bad jokes. She messaged me first, saying she liked my hoodie in one of my pictures. We started talking and she was easy to chat with. No weird energy, no over-the-top flirting, just normal. She said she'd been moving around for work, designing short-term rental spaces for clients, and that her schedule was unpredictable but fun. I didn't think much of it. After a few days, she invited me to come by for drinks. She said she'd had a long week and didn't feel like going out. I hesitated at first. Meeting at someone's flat right away sounded fast, but she joked that it wasn't some random flat, it was basically a show home. She sent me the address and even a picture of the view from her balcony to prove it. It looked unreal. That Friday night I went. The building was fancy, glass entrance, 24-hour concierge, the kind of place you'd expect influencers to live. The receptionist just smiled and waved me through after I said I was visiting. She must have seen people come in like that all the time. When I got to her floor, the hallway was silent. She opened the door before I even knocked. She looked exactly like her photos, relaxed, dressed casual but expensive looking. The apartment was spotless. Warm lights, wine glasses already out, quiet music playing. It had that hotel smell, clean but faintly fake like it had been recently aired out. She poured us drinks and we sat on the couch. The view really was insane. The whole city lit up below, cars moving like toy lights. She told me she'd just finished a big job redesigning some rental properties, said she was celebrating by staying in one of her clients' apartments while it was empty. I didn't question it. It sounded plausible. The first hour was perfect. We talked about travel, random stuff, our worst dates. She seemed funny, smart, kind of mysterious but in a good way. She kept saying she loved the quiet at night in high-rise buildings because it made her feel above everything. But as the night went on, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. There were no personal items around. No photos, no plants, not even basic things like toothpaste on the bathroom counter. The fridge was almost empty, just bottled water, 2 wine bottles, and a few random snacks that looked like they'd been bought that day. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying she liked keeping things minimal. I let it go, but it lingered in my mind. After another drink, she got up to grab her phone from the bedroom. A few minutes passed, and I started hearing faint tapping sounds from the hallway, like she was moving something. I thought maybe she was on the phone. Then there was a loud knock on the door. Sharp and heavy. I froze. She came running back, eyes wide. She didn't look calm anymore. She told me to stay quiet. Before I could even react, the knocking turned into pounding. Then the door burst open. 2 men in uniforms rushed in, police. One held up his badge while the other stepped forward, shouting her name. She didn't run at first, she just stood there, silent, until one of them told her to get on the ground. That's when she tried to bolt toward the kitchen, but they caught her before she even made it halfway. I stood there, completely stunned, still holding my wine glass like an idiot. One officer turned to me and asked who I was. I could barely get the words out, saying I'd met her online, that I thought she lived there. Turns out she didn't. The apartment was an Airbnb. She'd broken in 2 nights before using stolen host login details she'd gotten somehow. She'd been using the flat like it was hers, bringing people there, throwing little fake dinner dates, and even taking photos pretending she owned the place. They said she was part of an ongoing investigation. Multiple listings across the city had been broken into in the same way. She'd change the door codes through the host portal, sneak in for a few days, use everything, and leave before guests arrived. Sometimes she'd take small stuff, jewelry, electronics, clothes, but most of the time she just lived there like it was hers. That night, the actual tenant, the one who'd booked it through Airbnb, had arrived with the host to drop off some forgotten items. When their access code didn't work, the host checked the logs and realized it had been changed remotely. They called the police immediately. When the officers showed up, they caught her mid-date, with me sitting there like some kind of extra in her performance. She stayed quiet the whole time they cuffed her. I remember her looking right at me once, expression blank, like she didn't even know me. They let her out, and I just sat there while the host explained everything to the police. The luxury view, the wine, the candles, all of it was part of her routine. Apparently, she'd been doing it for months. She'd use fake designer profiles to meet people online, acting like she lived this high-end lifestyle. Then she'd invite them to one of the stolen Airbnb flats to make it look real. Most of the people she met never found out, it was all just for show. She'd post stories and tag the location, then vanish when the booking expired. I left that night around 2 a.m. The host told me not to worry, that they knew I wasn't involved, but I still felt sick. I kept thinking about how calm she was when I got there, how natural she seemed in that space that wasn't even hers. How she poured wine like she'd done it 100 times before. A few weeks later, I got a message from the police saying the investigation had wrapped up. She'd been arrested for breaking and entering, identity theft, and fraud. There were at least 9 other properties connected to her, all in expensive parts of the city. Her Tinder profile was gone the next morning. No trace. It was like she'd been erased. Now, whenever someone says they live in one of those perfect glass apartments with the skyline view, I think about that night. The candles, the fake calm, the way the door burst open mid-sentence. She made it all look effortless, like she belonged there, when she was really just waiting for it all to collapse around her.